When it comes to horror, it's a genre where the bad definitely outweighs the good. Even if a scary film has a great premise, there are so many factors that can let it down, such as lame acting, blatant plot holes, annoying characters, or just cheap jump scares. But one element that lets down so many horror films is poor special effects. Even with the best prosthetics and costumes, it's difficult to make a monster or a gory effect look right when you throw wonky CG into the mix. And while it shouldn't be a problem anymore in this day and age, it definitely still is. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 horror movies ruined by bad CGI. Number 10. Ju-on the Curse. So most filmgoers are aware that The Grudge is a remake of the Japanese film Ju-on the Grudge. However, few people realize that the film is actually the third installment of the Ju-on franchise. The original flick, Ju-on the Curse, was directed by Takashi Shimizu. Although the film was a success, the director wasn't happy with the special effects and essentially remade it 2 years later with a bigger budget. Even though Ju-on the Curse is well made, it is let down by CGI, especially in one scene. After a schoolgirl, Kana, has her jaw ripped off by the ghost, her mother, Noriko, sees Kana from behind walking up a staircase. As Kana turns around, the camera cuts to Noriko's face as she lets out a blood-curdling scream. If the scene cut to black here, it would have been perfect. Instead, the camera lingers on Kana's jawless face, showcasing her badly rendered windpipe and tongue while unconvincingly having blood seep out of her mouth. What makes this special effect so irritating is the scene is built up phenomenally. Sadly, bad CGI can ruin anything, even if everything else in the scene is spot on. Number 9. Sound of Thunder. Sound of Thunder takes place in a future where the company Time Safari has mastered time travel. The organization's CEO, Charles Hatton, allows clients to travel into the past to hunt dinosaurs for fun. But after the time stream is disrupted, the past starts to bleed into the present, forcing the scientists at Time Safari to reverse it to save humanity. Now, Sound of Thunder has a terrific premise, right? The original short story, written by Ray Bradbury, was so successful it helped popularize the concept of the butterfly effect. But despite its fascinating story, the film is let down by atrocious special effects, and of course Ben Kingsley's wig. Here's a tip for Hollywood movies. If dinosaurs play a big part in the story, make sure the animators know how to render them. The Allosaurus that the time travelers encounter looks so appalling that you'd swear that it was from a cutscene from a PlayStation 1 game. And what is more bewildering is that this film came out 12 years after Jurassic Park, and yet the dinosaurs definitely look worse here. Number 8. Lord of Illusions. In Clive Barker's Lord of Illusions, a surly private investigator called Harry discovers a mystical cult who are preparing to resurrect their leader, who is a powerful magician called Nyx. As Harry starts to uncover more and more of Nyx's history, a dark entity is sent to the PI's house to kill him. After he comes downstairs to investigate a strange noise, he comes face to face with a humanoid phantom. The spirit then summons a wall of fire that chases him around the house. Now, the phantom itself looks okay and the fire effects are hit and miss, but the silliest moment is when the apparition contorts into a blocky, swirling cube for, well, absolutely no reason. It is so pixelated that the cube would be better suited in Minecraft. Because it doesn't look convincing, the director could have removed this shot and it wouldn't have affected the scene in any way at all. If the spirit maintained its human-like form for the entire scene, that would have been, well, okay, but okay, you know what I'm saying? Instead, the director inserted this half-rendered cube thingy not once, not twice, but 3 times in this shot, making it impossible to take this scene seriously. Number 7. Deep Rising. In Deep Rising, a group of hijackers arrive on a cruise ship to rob the occupants, only to find that everyone has been devoured by a sea monster. Using its tentacles, this Cthulhu-inspired beast consumes its victims and drinks them dry before spitting out their bones. As terrifying as that sounds, the CGI for the monster's tentacles looks so fake it's impossible to find them scary. Due to bad lighting and blatant green screen, you will never believe for a second that the tentacles are actually there. But what's more frustrating is that some of the special effects in this film are actually pretty solid. The Leviathan itself has a cool, distinctive look, and the scene where one tentacle barfs out a half-eaten victim is genuinely haunting. If the CGI for the tentacles were a little better, well, in fact a lot better, Deep Rising could have been far more enjoyable. Number 6. The Ring 2. Although remakes are viewed in a rather negative light, the Americanized version of The Ring was almost as good as the original. The Ring 2, on the other hand, well, it's totally forgettable. In fact, most viewers can't even remember anything that happened in it except that scene. Yep, I'm gonna talk about it. As Rachel drives through the woods with her son, Aiden, their car is attacked by several deer. Instead of using an animatronic or, actual deer, the director decided to make the forest animals in this scene 100% CGI. Now, when a computer effect doesn't look great, it's common practice to edit it in a way to hide as much of it as possible. But that's not the case here. Instead, the camera follows the deer around in long shots so you can see just how fake it looks. Now, in the movie's defense, fur and hair are the hardest things to render in CGI. The animators probably did their best, but the technology just wasn't there at the time. Having said that, why did the director feel like a film revolving around a cursed videotape need a deer attack scene, especially if he couldn't make the deer look real to begin with? Number 5. A Nightmare on Elm Street, 2010 version. The original Nightmare on Elm Street is a 1980s classic. Due to Robert Englund's charismatic performance as dream-dwelling demon Freddy Krueger and the story's unique premise, Wes Craven's film became one of the most popular horror franchises ever. Despite being impaired by a shoestring budget and a lack of CGI, most of the film's visuals look pretty fantastic even by today's standards. One of the simplest but most effective shots is where Freddy presses through the wall above Nancy's bed while she sleeps. The effect was achieved by stretching spandex across a hole in the wall and then having a stuntman press into it. It's such a simple idea, but it created one of the creepiest shots in the franchise. And when the 2010 remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street attempted to recreate this moment with CGI, it looked so much worse. What's more bizarre is that this film had 20 times the budget of the original, and yet its special effects look so unfinished. None of the CGI is impressive in this doomed reboot, but the effects in this scene are especially disappointing. Number 4. An American Werewolf in Paris. John Landis's An American Werewolf in London is often viewed as the pinnacle of practical effects, not just in horror, but in all of cinema. Watching the scene of David transforming into a wolf looks so convincing, and so you can understand why this was the first film in history to bag an Oscar for Best Makeup. Because it set the bar for special effects so high, horror fans were wondering how the sequel, An American Werewolf in Paris, would maintain the same standard. But simply, it didn't. The CGI looks so inept, it feels insulting to associate this movie with the practical effects of its predecessor. To the sequel's credit, many scenes hide the dodgy effects with darkness and clever editing, but when it came to the climax, the filmmaker's decision to rely on CGI over prosthetics for the werewolf shots was a huge mistake. These supernatural beasts look so anemic and janky that it's hard to believe this film and its predecessor are actually from the same franchise. Number 3. The Haunting. The 1963 film The Haunting is an adaptation of Shirley Jackson's novel The Haunting of Hill House. Now, unlike most horror films at the time, The Haunting didn't rely on cheap scares. Instead, it focused on using very subtle but precise camera work and editing to make the viewer feel unsettled. It was so masterfully made that legendary director Martin Scorsese said The Haunting is his favorite horror film. Sadly, the remake cannot receive the same praise. This lackluster adaptation trades all of the subtle scares of the original for CGI ghost statues and bedsheets. Now, you could forgive the remake a little if the special effects were good or even passable, but they're not. Watching a CGI ceiling scream is unintentionally hilarious. Watching a door punching somebody looks ridiculous. And what makes these effects look less convincing is that the characters barely react when the ghosts appear or when a pillow starts talking. I mean, who doesn't react to a talking bloody pillow? The final showdown with the ghost of Hill House is especially ridiculous, since the entire screen is filled with more CGI than the finale of an Avengers movie. Number 2. Sleepwalkers. Sleepwalkers may not be the worst Stephen King film, but it's definitely the weirdest. When a movie has incestuous energy vampires, invisible cars, Mark Hamill, and people getting stabbed to death by corn, you know that as a viewer, you're in for one hell of a ride. But one of the weirdest moments, and that is saying a lot, is when Sheriff Simpson tries to pull over one of the vampires, Charles, for speeding. When Charles sees Simpsons has a cat in his car, he freaks out since his species is vulnerable to felines. When the cat meows, Charles goes into a frenzy, mutating into a baby, a werewolf, an alien, a werecat, before then reverting to his human form. The special effect here is terrible, since it looks like the animators used the most primitive morphing software to simulate Charles's transformations. But what makes it worse is that the scene has nothing to do with anything. I mean, why does he turn into a baby? It's silly special effects like this that has turned Sleepwalkers into one of the most unintentionally hilarious horror films in recent memory. And number 1, The Langoliers. Stephen King's The Langoliers centers around an airplane that accidentally enters a time rift. When the plane lands, the passengers realize that they're stuck in a moment in time and won't be able to return to normal time unless they fly back through the rift. They realize that they have to leave pretty soon as well because they're being pursued by the Langoliers. These creatures consume time in the past and so will eventually devour the passengers if they don't return to the present. Like most made-for-TV King adaptations, the film isn't great. It's filled with cheesy dialogue, cliched characters, and bad writing. But you kind of feel compelled to keep watching because you're intrigued by what these chronal munching monsters might look like. And after waiting 170 minutes, the Langoliers finally reveal themselves, and they are the worst rendered creatures in cinematic history. Considering that they look like floating meatballs with chainsaw teeth, you would suspect a toddler designed them, and it looks so goofy when they consume time, so much so that it's easy to forget that these are meant to be scary.